Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing in The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. We are on Book 4, the last book, and we are on Chapter 16, entitled They Come to the Castle of Abundance Once More. And with that, I'll get started. When they rode on next morning, Ralph was few-spoken, and seemed to heed little so long as they made good speed on the way. Most of the talk was betwixt Richard and the sage, Ralph but putting in a word when it would have seemed churlish to forbear. So they went their ways through the wood, till by then the sun was well westering. They came out at the water of the oak. And Richard drew rein there and spake, Here is a fair place for a summer night's lodging, and I would warrant both good knight and fair lady have lain here aforetime, and wish the dark longer. Shall we not rest here? Ralph stared at him astonished, and then anger grew in his face for a little, because forsooth, as Richard and the sage both wotted of the peace of the slaying of the lady, and he himself had every yard of the way in his mind as they went, it seemed but due that they should have known of this place also, what betid there. But it was not so, and the place was to Richard like any other lawn of the woodland. But thought came back to Ralph in a moment, and he smiled at his own folly. Howbeit, he could not do to lie another night on that lawn with other folk than erst. So he said quietly, Nay, friend, were we not better to make the most of this daylight? Seest thou if thou wants an hour of sunset? Richard nodded a yea-say, and the sage said no word more. But Ursula cast her anxious look on Ralph, as though she understood what was moving in him, and therewith those others rode away lightly. But Ralph turned slowly from the oak tree, and might not forbear looking onto the short sward round about, as if he hoped to see some token left behind. Then he lifted up his face as one awakening, shook his rein, and rode after the others down the long water. So they turned from the water anon, and rode the woodland ways, and lay that night by a stream that ran west. They arose betimes on the morrow, and whereas the sage knew the woodland ways well, they made but a short journey of it to the Castle of Abundance, and came into the little plain but 2 hours after noon. And saving that the scythe had not wended the tall mowing grass in the crofts, which the beasts and sheep were not pasturing, all was as on that other tide. The folk were at work in their gardens, or herding their cattle in the meads, and as aforetime they were merry of countenance and well clad, fair and gentle to look on. There were their beast-cots, and the little white church, and the fair walls of the castle on its low mound, and the days bright and sunny as all aforetime. And Ralph looked on it all, and made no countenance of being moved beyond his wont. So they came out of the wood, and rode to the ford of the river, and the carles and queans came streaming from their garths and meads to meet them, and stood round wondering at them. But an old carle came up from the throng, and went up to Ralph, and hailed him, and said, O knight, thou hast come back to us, and hast thou brought us tidings of our lady? Who is this fair woman that rideth with thee? Is it she? Spake Ralph, Nay, go look on her closely, and tell me thy deeming of her. So the carle went up to Ursula, and peered closely into her face. He stood her hand and looked on it, and knelt down and took her foot out of the stirrup and kissed it, and then came back to Ralph and said, Fair sir, I wot not but it may be her sister, for yonder old wise man I have seen ere erst with our heavenly lady. But though this fair woman may be her sister, it is not she. So tell me what has become of her, for it is long since we have seen her, and what thou tellest us, that same shall we trow, even as if thou wert her angel. For I spake with thee, it is nigh 2 years agone, when thou wert abiding with the coming of our lady in the castle yonder. But now I see of thee that thou art bright-faced, and mightier of aspect than aforetime, and it is in my mind that the Lady of Abundance must have loved thee and holpen thee, and blessed thee with some great blessing. Said Ralph, Old man, canst thou feel sorrow, and canst thou bear it? The carle shook his head. I wot not, said he. I fear thy words. Said Ralph, It were not to say less than the truth, and this is the very truth, that thou shalt never see thy lady any more. I was the last living man that ever saw her alive. And then he spake in a loud voice and said, Lament, ye people, for the Lady of Abundance is dead. Yet sure I am that she sendeth this message to you. Live in peace, and love ye the works of the earth. But when they heard him, the old man covered up his face with the folds of his gown, and all that folk brake forth into weeping, and crying out, Woe for us! The Lady of Abundance is dead. And some of the younger men cast themselves down onto the earth, and wallowed, weeping and wailing. And there was no man there that seemed as if he knew which way to turn, or what to do, and their faces were foolish with sorrow. Yet, forsooth, it was rather the carles than the queans who made all this lamentation. At last the old man spake, Fair sir, I have brought us heavy tidings, and we know not how to ask you to tell us more of the tale, yet if thou mightest but tell us how the lady died, woe's me for the word. Said Ralph, She was slain with a sword. The old man drew himself up stiff and stark. The eyes of him glittered under his white hair, and wrath changed his face. And the other menfolk thronged them to hearken what more should be said. But the elder spake again, Tell me who it was that slew her, for surely shall I slay him, or die in the pain else. Said Ralph, Be content, thou mayst not slay him. He was a great and mighty man, a baron who bore a golden sun on a blue field. Thou mayst not slay him. Yea, said the old man, but I will, or he me. Live in peace, said Ralph, for I slew him then and there. The old man held his peace a while, and then he said, I know the man, for he hath been here aforetime, and not so long ago. But if he be dead, he hath a brother yet, an exceeding mighty man. He will be coming here to vex us and minish us. Said Ralph, He will not stir from where he lies till earth's bones be broken, for my sword lay in his body yesterday. The old man stood silent again, and the other carles thronged him. But the women stood aloof, staring on Ralph. Then the elder came up to Ralph and knelt before him and kissed his feet. Then he turned and called to him 3 of the others who were of the stoutest and most stalwart, and he spake with them a while, and then he came to Ralph again, and again knelt before him and said, Lord, you have come to us, and found us void of comfort, since we have lost our lady. But we see in thee that she hath loved thee and blessed thee, and thou hast slain her slayer and his kindred, and we see of thee also that thou art a good lord. O the comfort to us, therefore, if thou wouldest be our lord. We will serve thee truly, so far as we may. Yea, even if thou be beset by foes, we will take bow and bill from the wall, and stand round about thee, and fight for thee. Only thou must not ask us to go hence from this place, for we know not but the plain of abundance, and the edges of the wood, and the brethren of the house of the thorn, who are not far hence. Now we pray thee by thy fathers not to naysay us, so sore as thou hast made our hearts. Also we see about thy neck the same like pair of beads which our lady was wont to bear, and we deem that ye were in one tale together. Then was Ralph silent a while, but the sage spoke to the elder. Old man, how great is the loss of the lady to you? Heavy loss, wise old man, said the carle, as thou thyself mayest know, having known her. And what did she for you? Said the sage. Said the elder, We know that she was gracious to us. Never did she lay tax or tale on us, and while she would give us of her store, and that often and abundantly. We deem also that every time when she came to us, our increase became more plenteous, which is well seen by this, that since she hath ceased to come, the seasons have been niggard unto us. The sage smiled somewhat, and the old man went on, But chiefly the blessing was to see her when she came to us, for verily it seemed that where she set her feet in the grass grew greener, and that the flowers blossomed fairer where the shadow of her body fell. And therewith the old man fell a-weeping again. The sage held his peace, and Ralph still kept silence, and now of these men all the younger ones had their eyes upon Ursula. After a while Ralph spake and said, O elder, and ye folk of the people of abundance, true it is that your lady who is dead loved me, and it is through her that I am become a friend of the well. Now meseemeth, though ye have lost your lady, whom ye so loved and worshipped, God wot not without cause. Yet I wot not why ye now cry out for a master, since ye dwell here in peace and quiet and all wealth, and the fathers of the thorn are here to do good to you. Yet if ye will it in sooth, I will be called your lord, in memory of your lady whom ye shall not see again. And as time wears, I will come and look on you and hearken to your needs. And if ye come to fear that any should fall upon you with strong hand, then send ye a message to me, Ralph of Upmeads, down by the water, and I will come to you with such following as need be. And as for service, this only I lay upon you, that ye look unto the castle, and keep it in good order, and ward it against thieves and renegades, and give guesting therein to any wandering knight or pilgrim or honest goodman who shall come to you. Now is all said, my masters, and I pray you let us depart in peace, for time presses. Then all they, and this time women as well as men, cried out joyfully, Hail to our Lord, and long life to our helper. And the women withal drew nearer to him, and some came close up to him, as if they would touch him or kiss his hand, but by seeming durst not, but stood blushing before him, and he looked on them, smiling kindly. But the old man laid his hand on his knee and said, Lord, wouldst thou not light down and enter thy castle? For none hath more right there now than thou. The prior of the Thorn hath told us that there is no lineage of the lady left to claim it, and none other might have else claimed it save the Baron of Sunway, whom thou hast slain, and else we would have slain him since he slew our lady. Ralph shook his head and said, Nay, old friend, and now, vassal, this we may not do. We must on speedily, for belike there is work for us to do nearer home. Yea, lord, said the carle, but at least light down and sit for a while under this fair oak tree in the heat of the day, and eat a morsel with us and drink a cup, that thy luck may abide with us when thou art gone. Ralph would not naysay him, so he and all of them got off their horses and sat down on the green grass under the oak. And that people gathered about and sat down by them, save that a many of the women went to their houses to fetch out the victual. Meanwhile the carles fell to speech freely with the wayfarers, and told them with much concerning their little land, were it hearsay or stark sooth. Such as tales of the wights that dwell in the wood, woadhouses, and elf women, and dwarfs, and such like, and how fearful it were to deal with such creatures. Amongst other matters, they told how a hermit, a holy man, had come to dwell in the wood, in a clearing but a little way thence from the northwest. But when Ralph asked if he dwelt on the way to the ford of the swelling flood, they knew not what he meant, for the wood was to them as a wall. Hereon the sage held one of the younger men in talk, and taught him that he might of the way of the Burg of the Four Friths, so that they might verily send a messenger to Upmeads, if need were. But the country youth said that there was no need to think thereof, as no man of theirs would dare the journey through the wood, and that if they had need of a messenger, one of the fathers of the Thorn would do their errand, whereas they were holy men, and knew the face of the world full well. Now in this while the folk seemed to have gotten their courage again, and to be cheery, and to have lost their grief for the lady. And of the maidens left about the oak were more than 2 or 3 very fair, who stood gazing at Ralph as if they were exceeding fain of him. But amidst these things came back the women with the victual, to wit, bread in baskets, and cheeses both fresh and old, and honey, and wood strawberries, and eggs cooked diversely, and skewers of white wood with gobbets of roasted lamb's flesh, and salad good plenty. All these they bore first to Ralph and Ursula and their 2 fellows, and then dealt them to their own folk. And they feasted and were merry in despite of the tale of evil tidings. They brought also bowls and pitchers of wine, that was good and strong, and cider of their orchards, and called many a health to the new lord and his kindred. Thus then they abode a-feasting till the sun was westering, and the shadows waxed about them. And then at last Ralph rose up and called to horse, and the other wayfarers arose also, and the horses were led to them. Then the maidens made bold of the joy of the feast, and being stirred to the heart by much beholding of this beloved lord, cast off their shamefacedness, and crowded about him, and kissed his raiment and his hands. Some even, though trembling and more for love than fear, prayed him for kisses, and he, nothing loath, laughed merrily, and laid his hands on their shoulders, or took them by the chins, and set his lips to the sweetness of their cheeks, and their lips of those that asked, and those that refrained, so that their hearts failed them for love of him. And when he was gone, they knew not how to go back to their houses, or places that were familiar to them. Therewith he and his got into their saddles, and rode away slowly, because of the thronging about them of that folk, who followed them to the edge of the wood, and even entered a little thereinto, and then stood gazing on Ralph and his fellows, after they had spurred on, and were riding down a glade of the woodland. Chapter 17. They fall in with that hermit. So much had they tarried over this greeting and feasting, that though they had hoped to have come to the hermit's house that night, he of whom that folk had told them, it fell not so. Whereas the day had aged so much ere they left the plain of abundance, that it began to dusk before they had gone far, and they must needs stay and await the dawn there. So they dight their lodging as well as they might, and lay down and slept under the thick boughs. Ralph woke about sunrise, and looking up saw a man standing over him, and deemed at first that it would be Richard or the sage. But as his vision cleared, he saw that it was neither of them, but a newcomer, a stout carle clad in russet, with a great staff in his hand, and a short sword girt to his side. Ralph sprang up, still not utterly awake, and cried out, "Who art thou, carle?" The man laughed and said, "Yea, thou art still the same brisk lad, only filled out to something more warrior-like than of old. But it is unmeet to forget old friends. Why dost thou not hail me?" "Because I know thee not, good fellow," said Ralph. But even as he spoke, he looked into the man's face again and cried out, "By St. Nicholas, it is Roger of the rope-walk. But look ye, fellow, if I have somewhat filled out, thou who wast always black-muzzled, art now become as hairy as a woodhouse. Who dost thou in the wilds?" Said Roger, "Did they not tell thee of a hermit new come to these shawls?" "Yea," said Ralph. "I am that holy man," quoth Roger, grinning. "Not that I am so much of that either. I have not come hither to pray or fast overmuch, but to rest my soul and be out of the way of men, for all things have changed since my lady passed away." He looked about and saw Ursula just rising up from the ground, and the sage stirring, while Richard yet hugged his bracken bed, snoring. So he said, "And who be these, and why hast thou taken to the wildwood?" "Yea, lad, I see of thee that thou hast gotten another lady, and if mine eyes do not fail me, she is fair enough. But there be others as fair, while the like to our lady that was, there is none such." He fell silent a while, and Ralph turned about to the others, for by this time Richard also was awake, and Ralph said, "This man is the hermit of whom we were told." Roger said, "Yea, I am the hermit and the holy man, and withal I have a thing to hear and a thing to tell. Were ye best to come with me, all of you, to my house in the woods, a poor one, forsooth, but there is somewhat of victual there, and we can tell and hearken therein, well sheltered and at peace. So to horse, fair folk." They would not be bidden twice, but mounted and went along with him, who led them by a thicket path about a mile, till they came to a lawn where through ran a stream. And there was a little house in it, simple enough of one hall, built with rough tree limbs and reed thatch. He brought them in and bade them sit on such stools or bundles of stuff as were there. But withal he brought out victual nowise ill, though it were but simple also, of venison of the wildwood, with some little deal of cakes baked on the hearth, and he poured for them also both milk and wine. They were well content with the banquet, and when they were full, Roger said, Now, my lord, like as oft befalleth minstrels, ye have had your wages before your work. Fall to, then, and pay me the scot by telling me all that hath befallen you since, woe worth a while, my lady died. I must needs say for thy sake. All is a big word, said Ralph, but I will tell thee somewhat. Yet I bid thee take note that I and this ancient wise one, and my lady withal, deem that I am drawn by my kindred to come to their help, and that time presses. Roger scowled somewhat on Ursula, but he said, Lord and master, let not that fly trouble thy lip. For so I deem of it that whatsoever time ye may lose by falling in with me, ye may gain twice as much again by hearkening my tale, and the rede that shall go with it. And I do thee, to wit, that the telling of thy tale shall unfreeze mine. So tarry not, if ye be in haste to be gone, but let thy tongue wag. Ralph smiled, and without more ado told him all that had befallen him, of Sweet Venom and Utterbol, and of his captivity and flight, and of the meeting in the wood, and of the sage, who there was, and of the journey to the well, and what betid there and since, and of the death of the champion of the Dry Tree. But when he had made an end, Roger said, There it is then, as I said when she first spake to me of thee, and bade me bring about the meeting with her, drawing thee first to the Burg, and after to the Castle of Abundance. I have forgotten mostly by what lies. But I said to her that she had set her heart on a man over lucky, and that thou wouldest take her luck from her and make it thine. But now I will let all pass, and will bid thee ask thee what thou wilt. And I promise thee that I will help thee to come thy ways to thy kindred, that thou mayest put forth thy luck in their behalf. Said Ralph, First of all, tell me, what shall I do to pass unhindered through the Burg of the Four Friths? Said Roger, Thou shalt go in at one gate and out at the other, and none shall hinder thee. Said Ralph, And shall I have any hindrance from them of the Dry Tree? Roger made as if he were swallowing down something, and answered, Nay, none. And the folk of Higham on the Way, and the brethren and their abbot, said Ralph. I know but little of them, quoth Roger, but I deem that they will make a push to have thee for captain, because they have had a war on their hands of late, but this shall be at thine own will to say yea or nay to them. But for the rest on this side of the shepherd's country ye will pass by peaceful folk. Yea, said Ralph, what then hath become of the pride and cruelty of the Burg of the Four Friths, and the eagerness and fierceness of the Dry Tree? Quoth Roger, This is the tale of it. After the champions of the Dry Tree had lost their queen and beloved, the Lady of Abundance, they were both restless and fierce, for the days of sorrow hung heavy on their hands. So on a time a great company of them had ado before the burghers somewhat recklessly, and came to the worse. Wherefore some drew back into their fastness of the Scar, and the others still rode on, and further west than their wont had been. But warily when they had the Wood Perilous behind them, for they had learned wisdom again. Thus riding, they had tidings of a host of the Burg of the Four Friths, who were resting in a valley hard by with great trains of captives and beasts and other spoil. For they had been raising the fray against the wheat-wearers, and had slain many carles there, and were bringing home to the Burg many young women and women-children after their custom. So they of the Dry Tree advised them of these tidings, and deemed that it would ease the sorrow of their hearts for their lady if they could deal with these sons of whores, and make a mark upon the Burg. So they lay hid while the daylight lasted, and by night and cloud fell upon these faineants of the Burg, and won them good cheap, as was like to be, though the Burg dwellers were many the more. Whereof a many were slain, but many escaped and gat home to the Burg, even as will likely happen in the worst of overthrows, that not all, or even the more part, be slain. Well, there were the champions and their prey, which was very great, and especially of women, of whom the more part were young and fair. For the women of the wheat-wearers be goodly, and these had been picked out by the rudders of the Burg for their youth and strength and beauty. And whereas the men of the Dry Tree were scant of women at home, and sore-hearted because of Our Lady, they forbore not these women, but fell to talking with them and loving them, howbeit in courteous and manly fashion, so that the women deemed themselves in heaven and were ready to do anything to please their lovers. So the end of it was that the champion sent messengers to Hampton and the castle of the Scar to tell what had betid, and they themselves took the road to the land of the wheat-wearers, having these women with them not as captives, but as free damsels. Now the road to the wheat-wearing country was long, and on the way the damsels told their new men many things of their land, and their unhappy wars with them of the Burg, and the griefs and torments which they endured of them. And this, amongst other things, that wheresoever they came, they slew all the males, even to the sucking babe, but spared the women, even when they bore them not into captivity. Whereof, said these poor damsels, it cometh that our land is ill furnished of carles, so that we women, high and low, go afield and do many things as crafts and the like, which in other lands are done by carles. In sooth, it seemed that of them they were both of stouter fashion, and defter than women are wont to be. So the champions, part in jest, part in earnest, bade them do on the armor of the slain burghers, and take their weapons, and fell to teaching them how to handle staff and sword and bow, and the women took heart and the valiant countenance of their new lovers, and deemed it all bitter earnest enough, and learned their part speedily, and yet none too soon. For when the fleers of the Burg came home, the port lost no time, but sent out another host to follow after the champions and their spoil. For they had learned that those men had not turned about to Hampton after their victory, but had gone on to the wheat-wearers. So it befell that the host of the Burg came up with the champions on the eve of a summer day, when they were yet 3 hours of daylight. But whereas they had looked to have an easy bargain of their foemen, since they knew the champions to be but a few, lo, there was the hillside covered with a goodly array of spears and glaives and shining helms. They marveled, but now for very shame, and because they scarce could help it, they fell on, and before sunset were scattered to the winds again. And the fleers had to bear back the tale that this more part of their foes were women of the wheat-wearers. But this time few were those that came back alive to the Burg of the Four Friths. For the freed captives were hot and eager in the chase, casting aside their shields and hauberks that they might speed the better, and valuing their lives at naught if they might but slay a man or two of the tyrants before they died. Thus was the Burg wounded with its own sword, but the matter stopped not there. For when that victorious host of men and women came into the land of the wheat-wearers, all men fled away in terror at first, thinking that it was a new onset of the men of the Burg, and that all the more, as many of them bore their weapons and armor. But when they found out how matters had gone, then, as ye may deem, was the greatest joy and exultation. And carles and queans both ran to arms, and bade their deliverers learn them all that belonged to war, and said that one thing should not be lacking, to wit, the gift of their bodies, that should either lie dead in the fields, or bear about henceforth the souls of free men. Nothing loath, the champions became their doctors and teachers of battle, and a great host was drawn together, and meanwhile the champions had sent messengers again to Hampton, telling them what was befallen, and asking for more men if they might be had. But the Burg abiders were not like to sit down under their foil. Another host they sent against the wheat-wearers not so huge, as well arrayed and wise in war. The champions espied its goings, and knew well that they had to deal with the best men of the Burg. And they met them in likewise, for they chose the very best of the men and the women, and pitched on a place whence they might ward them well, and abode the foemen there, who failed not to come upon them, stout and stern and cold, and well learned in all feats of war. Long and bitter was the battle, and the burghers were fierce without headstrong folly, and the wheat-wearers deemed that if they blenched now, they had something worse than death to look to. But in the end, when both sides were grown weary and worn out, and yet neither would flee, on a sudden came into the field the help of the Dry Tree, a valiant company of riders to whom the battle was but game and play. Then indeed the men of the Burg gave back and drew out of the battle as best they might, yet were they little chased, save by the newcomers of the Dry Tree, for the others were over-weary. and moreover the leaders had no mind to let the new-made warriors leave their vantage ground, lest the old and tried men-at-arms of the Burg should turn upon them and put them to the worse. Men looked for battle again the next day, but it fell not out so, for the host of the Burg saw that there was more to lose than to gain. So they drew back towards their own place. Neither did they waste the land much, for the riders of the Dry Tree followed hard at heel, and cut off all who tarried or strayed from the main battle. When they were gone, then at last did the Weed-Wearers give themselves up to the joy of their deliverance, and the pleasure of their new lives. And one of their old men that I have spoken with told me this, that before, when they were little better than the thralls of the Burg, and durst scarce raise hand against the foemen, the carles were but slow to love, and the queans, for all their fairness, cold and but little kind. However, now in the fields of the Wheat-wearers themselves all this was changed, and men and maids took to arraying themselves gaily as occasion served, and there was singing and dancing on every green, and straying of couples amongst the greenery of the summer night. And in short, the god of love was busy in the land, and made the eyes seem bright, and the lips sweet, and the bosom fair, and the arms sleek, and the feet trim, so that every hour was full of allurement. And ever the nigher that war and peril was, the more delight had man and maid of each other's bodies. Well, within a while the Wheat-wearers were grown so full of hope that they bade the men of the Dry Tree lead them against the Burg of the Four Friths. And the champions were ready thereto, because they wotted well that, Hampton being disgarnished of men, the men of the Burg might fall on it. And even if they took it not, they would beset all ways, and make riding a hard matter for their fellowship. So they fell to, wisely and deliberately, and led a host of the best of the carles with them, and bade the women keep their land surely, so that their host was not a great many. But so wisely they led them that they came before the Burg well nigh unawares. And though it seemed little likely that they should take so strong a place, yet not less befell. For the Burg dwellers, beset with cruelty and bitter anger, cried out that now at last they would have an end of this cursed people, and the horse and strong thieves their friends. So they went out agates in great multitude, but in worser order than their wont was. And there befell that marvel which sometimes befalleth even to the very valiant men, that now at the pinch all their valour flowed from them, and they fled before the spears had met, and in such evil order that the gates could not be shut. And their foemen entered with them, slaying and slaying even as they would, so that in an hour's space the pride and the estate of the Burg of the Four Friths was utterly fallen. Huge was the slaughter, for the Wheat-wearers deemed they had many a grief whereof to avenge them. Nor were the men of the Dry Tree either sluggards or saints to be careless of their foemen, or to be merciful in battle. But at last the murder was stayed. And then the men of the Wheat-wearers went from house to house in the town to find the women of their folk who had been made thralls by the burghers. There then was a many a joyful meeting betwixt those poor women and the men of their kindred. All was forgotten now of the days of their thraldom, their toil and mocking and stripes, and within certain days all the sort of them came before the host clad in green raiment, and garlanded with flowers for the joy of their deliverance, and great feast was made to them. As for them of the Burg, the battle and chase was over, no more were slain, save that certain of the great ones were made shorter by the head. But the champions and Wheat-wearers both said that none of that bitter and cruel folk should abide any longer in the town, so that after a delay long enough for them to provide stuff for their wayfaring, they were all thrust out of gates, rich and poor, old and young, man, woman, and child. Proudly, and with a stout countenance they went, for now was their valour come again to them. And it is like that we shall hear of them oft again, for they had but a few weapons amongst them when they were driven out of their old home, and neither hauberk nor shield nor helm, yet so learned in war be they, and so marvellous great of pride, that they will somehow get them weapons. And even armed but with headless staves and cudgels of the thicket, woe betide the peaceful folk, whom they shall first fall on. Yea, fair sir, The day shall come, meseemeth, when folk shall call on thee to lead the hunt after these famished wolves. And when thou doest so, call on me to tell thee tales of their doings, which shall make thine heart hard, and thy hand heavy against them. Meantime, said Ralph, what has betid to the fellowship of the Dry Tree? For I see that thou hast some grief on thy mind because of them. Roger kept silence a little, and then he said, I grieve because Hampton is no more a strong place of warriors. 2 or 3 carles and a dozen of women dwell now in the halls and chambers of the Scar. Here on earth all endeth. God send us to find the world without end. What then, said Ralph, have they then that had another great overthrow worse than the other? Nay, said Roger doggedly, it is not so. But where is the fellowship? Said Ralph. It is scattered abroad, quoth Roger. For some of the Dry Tree had no heart to leave the women whom they had wooed in the wheat-wearers' land, and some, and a great many, have taken their dears to dwell in the Burg of the Four Friths, whereas a many of the wheat-wearers have gone to beget children on the old bondwomen of the burghers, of whom there were some 2,000 alive after the burg was taken, besides that many women also came with the carles from their own land. So that now a mixed people are dwelling in the burg, partly of those women thralls, partly of carles and queans come newly from the wheat-wearers, partly of men of our fellowship, the more part of them who are wedded to queans of the wheat-wearers, and partly of men, chapmen and craftsmen and others who have drifted into the town, having heard that there is no lack of wealth there, and many fair women unmated. Yea, said Ralph, and is all this so ill? Said Roger, meseems it is ill enough that there is no longer rightly said a fellowship of the Dry Tree, though the men be alive who were once of that fellowship. Nay, said Ralph, and why should they not make a new fellowship in the burg, whereas they may be well peaceful, since they have come to their above of the foemen? Yea, said Roger slowly, that is sooth, and so is this, that there in the burg they are a strong band, with a captain of their own, much worshipped of the peaceful folk. And moreover, though they be not cruel to torment helpless folk, or hard to make an end of all joy today, lest they lose their joy tomorrow, they now array all men in good order within the burg, so it shall be no easier for a foeman to win than erst it was. What man, said Ralph, then be of better cheer, and come thou with us, and maybe the old steel of the champions may look the sun down in Upmeads. Come thou with me, I say, and show me and my luck to some of the fellows who are dwelling in the burg. And it may be, when thou hast told my tale to them, that some of them shall be content to leave their beds cold for a while, that they may come help a friend of the well in his need. Roger sat silent, as if he were pondering the matter, while Richard and the sage, both of them, took up the word one after the other, and urged him to it. At last he said, Well, so be it for this adventure, only I say not that I shall give up this hermitage and my holiness forever. Come thou aside, wise man of Swevenham, and I shall tell thee wherefore. Yea, said Ralph, laughing, and when he hath told thee, tell me not again, for sure I am that he is right to go with us, and belike shall be wrong in his reason therefore. Roger looked a little askance at him, and went without doors with the sage, and when they were out of earshot, he said to him, Hearken, I would have gone with my lord at the first word, and have been fain thereof, but there is this woman that followeth him. At every turn she shall mind me of our lady that was, and I shall loathe her, and her fairness, and the allurements of her body, because I see of her that she it is that hath gotten my lady's luck, and that but for her my lady might have yet been alive. Said the sage, Well quoth my lord that thou wouldest give me a fool's reason. What, dost thou not know, thou that knowest so much of the Lady of Abundance, that she it was who ordained this Ursula to be Ralph's bedmate, when she herself should be gone from him, were she dead or alive? And that she also should be a friend of the well, so that he might not lack a fellow his life long. But this thou sayest, not knowing the mind of our Lady, and how she loved him in her inmost heart. Roger hung his head and spake not for a while, and then he said, Well, wise man, I have said that I will go on this adventure, and I will smooth my tongue for this while at least. And for what may come hereafter, let it be. And now were we best to get to horse, for what with meat and minstrelsy we have worn away the day, till it wants but a little of noon. Go tell thy lord that I am ready. Farewell, peace, and welcome war and grudging. So the sage went within, and came out with the others, and they mounted their horses anon, and Roger went ahead on foot, and led them through the thicket ways without fumbling, and they lay down that night on the farther side of the swelling flood. Chapter 18. A Change of Days in the Burg of the Four Friths. There is naught to tell of their ways till they came out of the thicket into the fields about the Burg of the Four Friths, and even there was a look of bettering of men's lives. Though forsooth the husbandmen there were much the same had abided in the fields aforetime, whereas they were not for the most part freemen of the burg, but aliens who did service in war, and otherwise thereto. But it being eventide, there were men and women and children who had come out of the gates, walking about and disporting themselves in the loveliness of early summer, and that in far merrier guise than they had durst do in the bygone days. Moreover, there was scarce a sword or spear to be seen amongst them, whereat Roger grudged somewhat, and Richard said, Meseems this folk trust the peace of the burg overmuch, since, when all is told, unpeace is not so far from their borders. But as they drew a little nigher, Ralph pointed out to his fellows the gleam of helms and weapons on the walls, and they saw a watchman on each of the high towers of the south gate. And then quoth Roger, Nay, the burg will not be won so easily, and if a few fools get themselves slain outside, it is no great matter. Folk nowise let them come up to the gate unheeded, but gathered about them to look at the newcomers, though not so as to hinder them. And they could see that these summerers were goodly folk enough, and demeaned them as though they had but few troubles weighing on them. But the wayfarers were not unchallenged at the gate, for a stout man-at-arms stayed them and said, Ye ride somewhat late, friends. What are ye? Quoth Ralph, We be peaceful wayfarers, save to them that would fall on us, and we seek toward Upmeads. Yea, said the man, belike ye shall find something less than peace betwixt here and Upmeads, for rumour goes that there are alien riders come into the lands of Higham, and for aught I know the said unpeace may spread further on. Well, if ye will go to the Flower de Luce, and abide there this night, ye shall have a let pass to morn betimes. Then Ralph spake a word in Roger's ear, and Roger nodded his head, and throwing his cowl aback, he went up to the man-at-arms and said, Stephen a Hurst, thou hast time for a word with an old friend? Yea, Roger, said the man, is it verily thou? I deemed that thou hadst fled away from all of us to live in the wilds. So it was, lad, said Roger, but times change from good to bad, and back again. And now am I of this good lord's company, and I shall tell thee, Stephen, that though he rideth but a few today, yet merry shall he be that rideth with him tomorrow, if unpeace be in the land. Lo you, Stephen, this is the child of Upmeads, whom belike thou hast heard of. And if thou wilt take me into the chamber of thy tower, I will tell thee things of him thou wottest not. Stephen turned to Ralph and made obeisance to him and said, Fair sir, there are tales going about concerning thee, some whereof are strange enow, but none of them ill. And I deem by the look of thee that thou shalt be both a stark champion and a good lord. And I deem that it shall be my good luck if I see more of thee, and much more. Now if thou wilt pass on with thine and other fellows of the Flower de Luce, and leave this my old fellow in arms with me, and he shall tell me of thy mind, for I see that thou wouldest have somewhat of us. And since I doubt not by the looks of thee that thou wilt not bid us aught unknightly, when we know thy will, we shall try to pleasure thee. Yea, Lord Ralph, said Roger, thou mayest leave all the business with me, and I will come to thee not later than betimes tomorrow, and let thee wot how matters have sped. And methinks ye may hope to wend out at gates this time otherwise than thou didst before. So Ralph gave him yeasay, and thanked the man-at-arms, and rode his ways with the others towards the Flower de Luce. And whereas the sun was but newly set, Ralph noted that booths were gayer and the houses brighter and more fairly adorned than aforetimes. As for the folk, they were such that the streets seemed full of holiday-makers, so joyous and well-dight they were. And the women, like to those fair thralls whom he had seen that other time, saving that they were not clad so wantonly, however gaily. They came into the great square, and there they saw that the masons and builders had begun on the master church to make it fairer and bigger. The people were sporting there as in the streets, and amongst them were some weaponed men, but most part of these bore the token of the dry tree. So they entered the Flower de Luce and had good welcome there, as if they were come home to their own house. For when its people saw such a goodly old man in the sage, and so stout and trim a knight as was Richard, and above all when they beheld the loveliness of Ralph and Ursula, they praised them open-mouthed, and could scarce make enough of them. And when they had their meat and were rested, came two of the maids there, and asked them if it were lawful to talk with them. And Ralph laughed and bade them sit by them, and eat a dainty morsel. And they took that blushing, for they were fair and young, and Ralph's face and the merry words of his mouth stirred the hearts within them. And forsooth it was not so much that they spake as Ursula and the sage, for Ralph was somewhat few-spoken, whereas he pondered concerning the coming days, and what he half deemed that he saw a-doing at Upmeads. But at last they found their tongues, and said how that already rumour was abroad that they were in the Burg, who had drunk of the water of the well at the world's end. And said one, "It is indeed a fair sight to see you folk coming back in triumph, and so methinks will many deem if ye abide with us tomorrow. And yet, lady, for a while we are well nigh as joyous as ye can be, whereas we have but newly come into life also, some of us from very thraldom of the most grievous, and I am of those, and some of us daily in peril of it, like to my sister here. So may happen," said she smiling, "none of us shall seek to the well until we have worn our present bliss a little threadbare." Ursula smiled on her, but the sage said, "Mayhappen it is of no avail speaking of such things to a young and fair woman. But what would betide you if the old burghers were to come back and win their walls again?" The maid, who had been a thrall, changed countenance at this word, but the other one said, "If the burghers come back, they will find them upon the walls who have already chanced them. Thou mayest deem me slim and slender, old wise man, but such as mine arm is, it has upheaved the edges against the foe. And if it be a murder to slay a burgher, then am I worthy of the gallows." "Yea, yea," quoth Richard, laughing, "ye shall be double-manned, then, in this good town. Ye may well win, unless the sight of you shall make the foe over-fierce for the gain." Said the sage, "It is well, maiden, that if ye hold to that, and keep your carles in the same road, ye need not fear the burghers. And to say sooth, I have it in my mind that before long ye shall have both war and victory." Then Ralph seemed to wake up as from a dream, and he arose and said, "Thou art in the right, sage, and to mine eyes it seemeth that both thou and I shall be sharers in the war and the victory." And therewith he fell to striding up and down the hall, while the two maidens sat gazing on him with gleaming eyes and flushed cheeks. But in a little while he came back to his seat and sat him down, and fell to talk with the women. He asked them of the town and of the building therein, and the markets whether they throve. And they and 2 or 3 of the townsmen or merchants answered all, and told him how fair their estate was, and how thriving was the lot of one and all with them. Therewith was Ralph well pleased, and they sat talking there in good fellowship till the night was somewhat worn, and all men fared to bed. This is the end of chapters 16 through 18 of Book 4 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. In the next video, we will proceed to chapter 19 entitled Ralph Sees Hampton Under the Scar. Thank you for listening.